Hello, everyone. You are listening to Evidence for Faith. This is the Christian Apologetics Show, which helps Christians become thinkers and thinkers become Christians. Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Larakis, and because Keith Kendricks is on a cruise with his lovely wife Nancy around the Bahamas, we have a special guest with us today, Kirk Hastings, who's an author and a strong man of faith. And welcome to the show again, Kirk.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
We asked Kirk to sit in for Keith because he is a published individual, and he has a terrific book that was just published this past year. It's entitled What is Truth? And it's basically a handbook for separating fact from fiction in a propaganda-filled world. And he goes into a lot of the things in his book that we're actually going to be talking about on today's show. As Josh mentioned in the previous hour, we're talking today about the existence of God, but we're basically looking at the math, the science, and the philosophy that prove God's existence. Not the religion, not the faith, just the facts. Folks, you can call us on this show at 609-398-1020 to express your opinion, to argue with us, to support a position along with us. We are streaming live on the internet, wibg.com, and you can email us with questions as well. You can feel free to email us at evidence for faith. That's the number 4, evidenceforfaith at gmail.com.
And Keith, if you're listening to us over the internet on your cruise, it's time to turn over to keep that suntan even.
Okay. Keith, I know you are listening because you told us that you're going to make sure that we did a good job, and of course we will. Today's show really is geared towards the non-believer, the pre-believer, the seeker, anybody who is confused by what's apparent, what's visible in today's universe, what's real, and trying to reconcile in their own mind the existence of a supreme being, a creator, the originator of the universe. We would welcome you to the show and welcome your comments. But today we're going to stick with just the facts. We're not going to use the Bible, we're not going to use faith, we're not going to use religion. We're going to talk about the things that in our own mind prove in this physical day and age, this physical world, that a supreme being exists. Kirk, if you had to address somebody who wants to know what it is that you believe, just from a physical perspective, why the universe is what it is, and that it was created by who it was created by, what would you tell them in a nutshell? What do you think is your most compelling argument?
Ooh, that's a big question.
It is a big question, and that's why you wrote the book, actually.
Yes. I was just going to say, I wrote about this 300-page book answering that question. Where do you want me to start?
Okay. Well,
I guess I would have to start out with when I was in my early 20s, I was asking the same questions about, what is religion about generally, and is there anything to this, and why should I believe any of this, and how do I know which one is right, and all those kind of questions. And for me, it came down to I at least try to be a rational, logical person. I don't like to have people say things to me like, well, you just have to believe, or you just have to have faith, or the pie in the sky type stuff. I need to have facts and evidence to compel me to believe something. And in my mind, believing in God shouldn't be any different from believing in anything else in life. You examine the evidence and you go with whatever the evidence shows you one way or the other. And it seemed to me that if God is really real, you should be able to uncover evidence that he exists, just like you uncover evidence for anything else. And, not necessarily just using the Bible. Of course, the Bible tells us a lot of things about God that we couldn't know any other way. But as far as, the basic question as to whether he's real or not, we should be able to answer that to some extent by the world around us should indicate something one way or the other. And that's where I started.
Correct.
With that.
And, I too had a very similar problem. Being a man of math and science, and also as a physician, I had to come to grips with that too.
Mm-hmm.
And just from the science point of view, one of the stumbling blocks that we all have as scientists is that if you can't see it and you can't measure it, you can't taste it, you can't feel it, then how can you tell me that it exists? This
Right.
God concept is a very, very difficult thing to get a hold of. And so because of that, we're going to try to get into some of the reasons why you and I came to a faith, because we fully understand the bigger magnitude and the bigger questions that have evolved not only in our own mind, but also within the realm of science and reason as well. And that's why today we're going to talk about the math and the science and the philosophy behind the existence of God without going to faith or without resorting to the Bible or any of the other religious tools that we might tap into. We're just going to talk about the facts. And if you are listening, you can call us with questions, comments, or arguments at 609-398-1020. Okay, why don't we get into some of the facts about the existence of God? And I think that before we get into major discussions about science and so forth, I think we have to talk about some mathematical concepts such as infinity. Okay? If everybody has a concept of infinity, then we all realize how big this number can be. If you have an infinite collection of coins or an infinite collection of cars or stamps, this is a never-ending stream of physical objects. Just like when you look up into the sky, there's an infinite number of stars, too numerous to count.
At least to us, it appears that there are.
Correct. Now, one of the concepts that philosophers have been grappling with since day one is that they want to know if it's actually possible to cross infinity. Can you come from the very beginning and come up to the present, or go beyond, or start in the present day and go back to infinity? And the answer is no. It's impossible to cross infinity, just as if it's impossible to count the number of stars, or impossible to count any infinite number of things.
Sure.
It just can't happen.
Well, the word infinity in itself means no end.
That is
so
correct.
how can you come to the end of it if there is no end?
Correct. Now, scientists have been grappling with this as well, and one of the ways they try to explain the universe is with the Big Bang, okay? Just like, you and I would resort to the Bible and say, well, God created it on the first day. But in the Big Bang Theory, the scientists are actually admitting that the universe had a beginning. Now, by universe,
Sure.
I mean everything in this spatial, temporal universe is what we define as the universe. Spatial, temporal, physical objects within the universe is what we're talking about. And really, it's impossible to count those number of bodies, so it had to have a beginning, and the scientists try to best explain it by Big Bang. Now, you and I would say, well, okay, there was a beginning, and therefore it had to have a beginning, a beginner, rather, to bring about this effect, which we call the universe. So,
but it's interesting, too, that these scientists that believe in the Big Bang, if you ask them what was before the Big Bang and what caused it, they have no answer to that.
Correct. But the basic supposition...
Yet they'll still insist that they believe the universe is infinite, that it's always existed, but they cannot tell you what there was before the physical universe came into being.
Correct. And to that end, we would argue that there is something bigger, something huge, something magnificent that could have put this all together and caused the universe to begin. Okay,
Right.
So there was a beginner, if you will, something that created this, put all the right things in place to start this. We know that the universe had to be beginning because you can measure the actual heavenly bodies expanding. The universe is expanding.
Right.
So if you want to go back in time by extrapolation, you can say, well, it had a beginning because everything would have been condensed and compressed at that moment in time, and scientists call that the Big Bang.
Nothing can expand forever. It has to start expanding at some point.
That's correct.
It's not static. It's moving, so it had to start moving at some point.
So
And the question is, when and where did it start moving?
Right. Well, there had to be a mover to start
Right.
that movement, and he had to put all the ingredients together, and we call that concept God.
The prime mover.
Yes, he is the uncaused cause of all that's physical.
Right.
And it's an interesting definition of God, the uncaused cause of all things, because both atheists and theists agree on that definition. So if they're going to get into a debate, they have to agree on what the definition of God is. Now, they may not believe in God. They may say, well, there is no God, but if you want to argue about the concept of God, they all agree that he would be the uncaused cause of all that's real.
He would have to be.
Right, exactly.
Yes, that's what he would have to be if he existed.
So whether you're a believer in God or not, and we're not talking about Christianity, we're talking about the essence of God or the concept of God, the prime mover, the beginner, the creator of the universe, and so forth. Scientists explain it by the Big Bang. I actually refer to it as the Big Flash, because in the beginning, when God created it, he said, let there be light. In space, it's a vacuum. There is no sound in a vacuum.
Right.
So there couldn't have been a bang. It had to be a flash. Okay,
I never thought of it that way.
You have to have an atmosphere to transmit
Can you
sound.
have a silent bang?
There would be a big flash, but there would not be a bang.
Right.
Okay.
That's true.
So the argument about infinity is another interesting argument, because there had to be a beginning. There had to be the beginning of time, time and space at the beginning, with something bigger than that operating outside of space and time. And that's where we come up with the concept of God.
And really, if you approach the argument from the materialist point of view, they believe that the material universe is all that there is. So if that's the case, then I think most atheists and materialists would admit, if you back them into a corner, that all material things have a beginning somewhere. Everything material comes into existence at some point. It's not there forever. Something makes it a material thing.
Yeah.
And then you have to, if you go back beyond that, it's like, okay, what would cause a material thing? It would have to be something that's not material in order to create that, because the creative force would have to be greater than the thing it creates. You see what I mean?
Yes, and if you take the argument back to its logical beginning or conclusion, if you will, nothing can come from nothing. And that's part of the problem, and that's why scientists have to explain it in a certain way.
If someone tries to say, well, the universe came from nothing, that's a nonsense statement. That's like saying blue is yellow. It's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. It's like, okay, if you believe that at one point there was nothing, you have to come up with an explanation as to how we got from nothing to something, and the nothing can't make something.
That is correct, and that's also the point. Even with your own personal beginning, okay, you were conceived when two strands of DNA combined, and then the first cell division happened. Okay, that had a beginning,
right?
But you have to back up the truck and go all the way back. There had to be the beginning of life, all life forms as we know it,
right?
And they all had a beginning.
And where did the first human being come from that started this cycle? Well, there had to be a first one somewhere.
Right, but by extension also all living forms had to come from something. And scientists explain that in the form of a primordial soup, which then sprang forth life. But then again, you have to believe in spontaneous generation.
Which itself is an unscientific concept.
That is correct. And it's a claim that we all know to be false. But in order to be correct, politically correct in the scientific realm, in the secular humanists' worldview, you have to believe that things came from nothing. Okay, whether it was the beginning of the universe or whether it was the beginning of any life form whatsoever.
Right.
So that there are two.
And when have you ever seen something come from nothing?
You know what, folks? I would actually challenge any one of you who's listening out there to call in with an example, a bona fide example of something that sprang into existence from nothing. You can call us at 398-1020. Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Larakis.
I'm Kirk Hastings.
Okay, welcome to the show again, Kirk. But anyway, those are a couple of arguments that you can use going back to the beginning of time and also back to infinity. And the point we're trying to make here, folks, is that the spatio-temporal world that we define as the universe is something that science has put into a box, something that's definable, something that's finite. But we know better than that. We know that there's something bigger than the box, something that's outside of the box that created what's in the box.
Right.
And it's our job today to try to help you bridge that gap between materialism and science to the concept of a creator and a beginner who started this whole process that we now call our own universe, the planet that we live on, and the beginning of life.
And I think what you're also trying to at least imply here is that in the physical world, there really is no such thing as an infinite number of anything. There has to be a number. There has to be, you have to start at the first one and you get up to however many you have, but having an infinite number of anything in a materialistic sense is really impossible. So then the question is, it really kind of leads you to the idea that something that is infinite must have created that which is less than infinite. In other words, the creator would have to be greater than what he creates. There's also, I really don't think you can come up with any example in the materialistic universe of something that can create something that is superior to itself. It's either equal or lesser than what created it. So if you apply that to the universe, something greater than the universe must have created it. Logic would lead you to that.
Sure.
And then the question is, okay, what would that thing be?
Right, and hence...
And our answer is God.
Yes, and getting back to the universe, I'd like to bring in the argument of entropy into this.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you look at the universe, and we know that it had a beginning, whether it was created by God or the Big Bang, doesn't matter, that's immaterial. We all agree, whether you're religious or whether you're scientists, that the universe had a beginning. Okay, now biological extension and using the second law of thermodynamics, that is entropy, everything is unwinding, everything is
running down.
Running down, everything is decaying.
The universe is constantly losing heat and energy.
That is correct. That's why the stars are burning, their fuel is burning up.
Right.
If the universe has been going on for an infinite number of years, we would have had an infinite number of stars already die and be gone.
Right.
We know that our own Earth's star, the sun that we know, is eventually going to run out of fuel.
Right.
That'll eventually happen. It will not go for an infinite number of years.
Right.
Because it's a smaller star on the scale of things.
And so far as we know, every other star in the universe has the same quality. It's using fuel, and one day we'll run out of it.
That's correct. So we know by extension that because of entropy that the universe cannot be an infinite collection of stars that will last forever. Mm-hmm. It's finite, and the amount of energy within each star is finite. Right. And that eventually there will be star death. We see that. Mm-hmm. Stars are dying, but then there are other stars that are being created, some supernovas. But remember, with entropy and using the universe, whatever star that's created is sucking in energy from other locations, but the net effect is that you're still losing energy. Mm-hmm. And you're losing mass because that mass is being consumed and heat is being given off. So the universe is cooling. That's also been demonstrated with spectral analysis as the shift occurs and so forth. But we can see that not only as scientists but also by logical extension with the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah, try running your car when it runs out of gas.
Right. And by the way, we're not talking about evolution today. We're talking about the existence of God. We're talking about how it is that this whole thing came into existence. And we're trying to use some math arguments, some scientific arguments, as well as some philosophical arguments as to the existence of God. And really, you come to that conclusion because there really is no adequate explanation being offered by scientists or secular humanists to explain how it is that this whole thing came into existence, and it's really a fascinating discussion.
If I could just repeat what you just said a minute ago, the idea that we're posing is that if the universe were infinitely old, it would have run out of fuel an infinite number of years ago, long ago, in other words, very long ago. So the fact that the universe is still here indicates it's not infinite.
That's correct. And the bottom line is that the net effect is that the universe is running out of gas. It's cooling, and it is not going to go on forever.
Mm-hmm.
So what if the universe is running out of energy? Okay, and what if it's been here infinitely long? It leads us to some problems, and the astrophysicists have recognized this, and they know that even our own sun can't last forever. And by logical extension, they know if each and every star is going to run out of energy, it had to have a logical beginning. It had to have a beginning point.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not here to argue whether or not it was 5,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, or 50 billion quadrillion years ago. The point is that the universe had a beginning. Each and every body within the universe had a beginning. And just from an operative point of view, I believe that everything in the universe in that box was created by something bigger than the box and outside of the box. That is outside of time and space.
Right.
Okay, so we can't quantify God, but we know that he had to be bigger than what he created, and he is outside of time and space.
Right. It's interesting too that Einstein's theory of relativity even points to the fact that the universe must have had a beginning. And when he came to that realization, he was I think he started out as an atheist, and he ended up kind of an agnostic toward the end, and I'm not sure whether he actually got to a point of faith before he died or not, but he was very reluctant to face this idea that the universe must have had a beginning. But his theory of relativity was forcing him toward that. And it's interesting, I don't have any of the quotes right in front of me right now, but it's interesting to read some of the quotes from him during his life as he got older, where he slowly started to admit, well, the universe must have had a beginning, and there must have been a creative force that brought it into existence, because science points toward that. He couldn't escape it. Yeah. He didn't particularly want to come to that conclusion, but the evidence forced him to it.
Yes, and I've actually read a number of his quotes where he actually references God.
Yes.
You know, in his quotes.
Especially later in his life, he started to do that because he started to understand his own scientific theories were forcing him to that conclusion, even though he didn't necessarily really want to go there.
You know, it's funny, I was having a discussion last week with some other people about Einstein's equation E is equal to mc squared, and for those of you who aren't familiar with what that means, the E part is energy, m is mass, and c squared is the speed of light squared. Now, the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. Square that number, and it's a huge astronomical number.
Right.
No pun intended. But the point is that if you want to look at the mass of the universe, okay, all you have to do is rearrange the equation, okay, and bring the c squared under E. Okay, you can also rearrange the equation and look at it from other perspectives and see that the amount of light and energy that was elaborated, it's just an astronomical number. Mm-hmm. But then again, when you get into the second law of thermodynamics, the mass is decreasing and the energy is decreasing because it is not an infinite quantity.
Right.
Even though the number is huge, it's not infinite.
Right.
Okay. So anyway, that's...
and we shouldn't confuse that a huge number and an infinite number are not the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly.
I think some people use those terms, to substitute one term for the other, but they're not the same thing.
They're using it loosely. Okay. So anyway, what do you think caused God? Is that a question that can be answered?
That's a question that a lot of children ask. Children think simplistically, and if you say, well, they'll come to you at some point in their life and they'll say, well, what caused the universe? And you say, well, God caused it. And of course, their next natural question is going to be, well, who caused God? And how do you answer that?
Well, I go back to the box. God caused everything, God created everything, but he's not inside of the box. He's not quantifiable. He's outside of the box. And he's what caused everything to come into existence. He's the uncaused cause of all that is physical. Okay, so it's a...
That's the best answer, that he is unique in that he is the only uncaused cause in the universe. He's the starting point for something else.
Right. And he had volition. He had to decide that he was going to cause it.
And really, scientifically, you eventually are forced to that conclusion that if you keep going back far enough, you have to come to an uncaused cause. There's just no other place to go.
Right. And everything that does come into existence has to have a cause.
Yes.
We refer to that.
Everything material.
That's correct. Right.
And of course, God is not material, so that doesn't apply to him.
Okay. So what is God if he's not material?
He's a spirit, according to what the Bible and Jesus taught us.
Right. But he is outside of space and time. He actually started this whole ball rolling with the first created thing, and we can call that the universe, and hence time started. Okay. But he's always been outside of space and time. There was no time before God, and there was nothing else before God.
No, because time is really related to the physical universe. You have to have a physical universe in order to have time. One's kind of dependent upon the other. But if you don't have time, if you don't have a physical universe, you don't have time either, which, of course, also leads back to the idea in the Bible that God is beyond time. Time doesn't affect him because that's something he created with the physical universe. So he's outside of time.
Right.
Which, if you think about that long enough, can boggle your mind.
Sure.
But you really logically, you're inevitably forced to that conclusion that time must have been created by something outside of it.
Right. So if somebody really...
What that is, we don't know exactly, but
right.
that has to be the answer.
And if somebody tries to nail you down with the question, what caused God or who caused God, it's really a question that you can't answer because he didn't come from anywhere. He was in existence from the infinite beginning of time, which he created. And he's outside of the box. We're all inside of the box. And if you want to look at the universe as a box, but you can't put him in the box. He's bigger.
And us being in the box, it's really hard to conceive of what something outside the box would be. But that's what God is.
And when you look from outside of the box in, you realize how minute we are.
Yes.
It's just it's an
how
amazing
finite
thing.
And how limited we really are.
Right. Okay. So, yes, I have an understanding that we have a caller. Go ahead, caller. Identify yourself.
Hi, I was listening. I heard you talking about Einstein, and his most famous quote was that science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind.
Yes, I've heard that.
Yeah,
Wow.
and then another one that he said that's really, I got these off of a Judaism website that had a whole thing on Einstein, and it says that everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that a spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe, a spirit vastly superior to that of man, and one in the face of which we with our modest powers must feel humble.
Wow, I've
That's
never heard
pretty
that one
powerful,
before.
huh?
Yeah, I've not heard that one either.
Yeah, if you guys want to go there, it's called simpletoremember.com, and it has a whole list of his quotes.
Very interesting.
Say it again, simpletoremember.com.
Yeah, simpletoremember.com, and it's all about Einstein.
Wow.
Things that, so, there's a superior mind admitting that there's a spiritual force.
That's almost a direct endorsement of the Bible.
It sure is.
Amazing.
But thanks. I thought you'd like that.
Yes.
Do you have any insights as to whether or not Einstein actually was a believer in Judaism? We know that he was Jewish, but was he a believer in God?
He talks a lot about God.
Right.
So he says, I want to know how God created this world. I want to know his thoughts. So, I don't know. Who knows? God knows. God's the only one that knows that. So.
Well, that'd be pretty cool if we meet him one day, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. How about that?
Okay. Thank you very much for calling.
You're welcome. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
You are listening to Evidence for Faith. Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Larakis.
And I'm Kirk Hastings.
Okay.
I'm awake.
Okay. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts.
I was just boggled by that quote. I'm still thinking about it.
You can call us at 398-1020. Again, you can also email us if you are a little bit on the shy side. You can email us to our website. That's Evidence for Faith. That's the number 4, Evidence for Faith keith.kendricks@gmail.com. Today we're talking about the existence of God, the math, the science, and the philosophy that prove God's existence, and not just the religion, not the faith, just the facts. So we're trying to stick to that. We're trying not to bring the Bible into the discussion, but obviously, if you are searching, you can find a lot of answers to life's most compelling questions in that, the book, the #1 bestseller of all time, even though it doesn't show up on the New York book bestseller list at all, ever.
It would be on there every week, so they just don't bother.
Exactly. They don't want to waste the type on it. But anyway, today we have Kirk Hastings, who is a published author. His book, What is Truth? And it's a handbook for separating fact from fiction in a propaganda-filled world. That is available. It was copyright in 2009 published by America. And you can go online and get that at Amazon.com or any other leading bookseller.
BarnesandNoble.com or any of those internet book sites.
Right, any other internet
And you could
site.
order a copy from your local bookstore if they don't have it on the shelf.
Yep, and they can. It's available. And Kirk spent several years researching this book and really looking at the questions that life offers up. And his is a no-nonsense, logical, mind-friendly book that will guide you in your own search and answer the questions that many men going back to the beginning of time have asked. For instance, can we know if God really exists? Is the Bible historically accurate? Is Christianity intellectually credible? Is Jesus really God? Do science and the Bible conflict? And does our mass media tell us the truth about Christianity and the Bible? So if you're looking for answers to questions like those, you might want to check out Kirk Hastings' book, What is Truth? Very interesting title, too. I love the quote because that was exactly the question that Pilate asked when Jesus was on trial, what is truth? So welcome to the show again, Kirk. It's a pleasure working with you. Keith Kendricks is on a cruise with his lovely wife, Nancy, and we hope that they're enjoying the Bahamas. But anyway, back to the item at hand, and that is the existence of God, the math, the science, and the philosophy behind that. So anyway, we've been talking about the universe and how it came into existence and the mover or the force behind it and how nothing can come from nothing. I think that anybody who's logical understands that. We know that spontaneous generation never happened. Something had to create all of life. Something had to create the universe. A creator, some moving force bigger than the universe itself had to put it all together to make it come to into existence. We know that the Big Bang is what science holds as the beginning, but we're arguing that that Big Bang was actually moved by the Creator God. But anyway, we wanted to talk about some of the other scientific evidences, Kirk, because the show today is trying to stay away from faith items and it's trying to stay away from fiction items. But the interesting thing that I find about science frequently, especially with the atheists and with the secular humanists, it takes more faith to believe as an atheist in the science, some of the stuff that's being propagated by the scientific professors, especially in our colleges and universities. It takes more faith to believe what they're saying than it does to believe in a creator God.
Mm-hmm.
And
because really, when you study the evidence for what they believe, their evidence is extremely flimsy.
Well,
they fill the rest of it in with speculation and imagination.
That's absolutely correct. And they're trying to give explanations that they really can't support. And by and large, the students are unable to challenge them because, unfortunately, they have to feed back to the professor what's being taught on examinations and so forth. And if you do come in to a college or university setting with a Christian background, pretty much you're humiliated for any discussion about God or the beginning of the universe. by a power bigger than the universe itself, because they're thinking within the box, and God, who is outside of the box, cannot be brought into this discussion.
Yeah, there definitely are very few open forums today to be able to discuss both sides of the issue.
Correct. Many movements have occurred across the country to bring the evidence of evolution in contradistinction to the evidence for creation into the scientific classroom, and it's been denied at every level in the state and local political arenas, unfortunately, because there's a whole lot of good science now behind creationism, and it's just not being allowed in the government school system. We're talking about the beginning of the universe and the power of God having that volitional choice as to being the having the ability to create the universe. So God had to have that ability to do something, to put it all together, and he had to have the power and the force and the ingredients to do that. The Big Bang basically says that it all came together on its own and it just spontaneously happened. But again, nothing comes from nothing, and that's our argument against the Big Bang. We agree that something like the Big Bang happened. We believe that God spoke everything into existence and lined up all of the events, the chemicals, the gases, the energy, the force behind the existence of what we now call the universe. And it definitely had a beginning. Science knows that it had a beginning. So we are all in agreement that it had a beginning. But we believe that there was a beginner that prompted this whole chain of events to occur. I think that Einstein even had that concept too, as our most recent caller suggested. So anyway, there had to be a first event. Outside of time, outside of space, something had to put all of it together. It just didn't happen spontaneously. There had to be a volitional force and a mover behind all of it. It initiated the motion, it initiated the chemistry, it initiated the physics, it initiated the items that all came into play to start the whole thing. Just like, if there's any cause for something in this universe, even on this planet, there had to be a mover that moved it first. Whether it's a stone that gets thrown against a building and it breaks a window, something had to initiate the movement on that stone.
Right.
Whether it was a tire from a truck that kicked up the stone or a kid throwing a rock, which is a common scenario, but something had to initiate the movement. Even if something were to blow over, for instance, let's say a tree blows over onto a house. Well, what caused that tree to blow over? Well, the wind did. Well, what caused the wind? You can take it all the way back in the argument, but something had to move that wind.
It's really totally irrational for anyone to say that the universe just came into existence on its own. That would be like saying if you come outside in the morning and there's a big dent in the side of your car and you're saying, well, that just happened. Nothing did it. It just spontaneously dented.
Yeah, wrinkled.
I mean, how many people do you think, if you said that to, how many people do you think would buy that argument?
Yeah, well,
something must have dented your car.
Yeah, it happens all the time in parking lots, and it does happen. But
yeah, and really anything that happens during the day, is there anything you can point to and say nothing caused that? So why should we think that the universe came into existence any other way but the same way? Something caused it.
Well, we're going to call him an unmoved mover.
Okay.
Outside of space and time, something had to move this whole energy process into motion before this big bang or this big flash happened. And we call him God. I think scientists are lost in their explanation to explain how it all came into existence from nothing, because nothing can come from nothing. I think we've established that. That's a rational perspective. Christians aren't irrational, unlike what many of the scientific people in the university settings will tell people. But we're looking at these things factually, just the facts.
Even mathematics proves what we're saying. 0 times 0 is what?
Zero.
Zero.
That's
you
absolutely
can't get
correct.
anything else but that answer.
Right.
So you've got to start with something other than zero in order to end up with a number.
Right, exactly right. So if we have a prime mover moving all of these ingredients towards life or towards the beginning of the universe, this unmoved mover had to have volition. He had to be a free moral agent, just like you and I are, Kirk. We decided today to come here to do the show, not because anybody else forced us to, but because we wanted to. We were free moral agents to take on this task and share our thoughts and our insights and our intellect with people, our insights relative to your book, relative to what's available in scientific literature, and just to try to make sense of where did it all start? You know, what started this whole process that we call the universe and even life forms. And we say that there is something bigger and better than what's inside of the box. And by definition, he is the uncaused cause of everything in the universe, in the physical world, in the physical realm that we now know.
Really, we could sum this all up by quoting the very first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's what we're saying. And it's interesting how there's no attempt to explain anything about that verse. It doesn't try to explain who or what God is. It doesn't try to explain how he did it. It just says God did it. And it takes that as a basis of truth. And we need to take it the same way.
I really didn't want to get into the Bible, folks, but since you brought it up, Kirk, I want to take the second verse, too. I don't have the Bible in front of me, but I know what it says. It says that the world, the earth, was formless and void, but the Spirit of God was hovering over it and the deep. Okay, so there was nothing there. It was formless and void. There was nothing there. That's space. That's a vacuum. Okay, and then
that sounds like really another way of saying nothing, isn't it?
That is
There's
correct.
nothing there.
There's nothing there. It was formless and void. Void is a null set in math. Nothing.
Right. Nothing.
Zero. A zero
Right.
set. And then something happened.
Yep.
And God said, "Let there be light." Okay, that's the big bang. I call it the big flash. And then from that point forward, everything started to happen.
This is the unmoved mover operating.
That's correct. But anyway, we believe that it's the most sensible explanation for how the universe began, and that there was a being that was outside of time, outside of the universe, who had the tools, the power, all of the ingredients necessary to start the universe. He also had the power of free choice to do it. So at one point in time, he decided to do it, and consequently we have the beginning of the universe as we know it. The spatio-temporal world is how we define the universe, within space and time, all physical objects therein. And there was nothing prior to God that caused him to do it. Okay, so the answer to that little child's question, well, where did God come from? Who is God? Who caused God? We can't define him outside of the box. In the Bible, again, I didn't want to get into that, but God said, "I am who I am." Am being in the present tense, meaning the all-powerful, the infinite.
The eternally existent one is the way I like to think of that phrase.
From the beginning. From the beginning. And
Yes.
that goes back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning. From the beginning.
Really, the question, who caused God, is a nonsense question. If God is an uncaused cause, that's a nonsense question.
Correct. And by definition, theists and atheists agree that if there is a God, then he is the uncaused cause, okay, the mover of all things. And the concept is actually a pretty easy one to get your hands on, because if I asked you, Kirk, what is a unicorn, what's your answer?
A horse with a horn on its head.
Oh, a horse with a horn on its head. And we all agree that a unicorn is a horse with a horn on its head.
Right.
But the real question is, does a unicorn exist? And the answer is no, unicorn doesn't exist, but by definition, we know that a horse with a horn is a unicorn,
Right.
and it's mythical, okay?
Right.
God is not a mythical...
But if one did exist, that's what it would be.
That's correct, okay? So our definition of God is that If God
He
exists,
is an uncaused cause.
that's correct. So we all agree, the atheists,
That's what God is.
the atheists and theists alike agree that God is the uncaused cause of all things in the physical universe.
They simply disagree whether he's real or not real.
Correct. And our position today is that God is real, and that he is a more logical author, creator, beginner of this whole process than what science is coming up with.
Right.
And
Which really they're not coming up with much beyond the Big Bang. They're not
Correct.
coming up with anything. They say they don't know.
right, they can't go past the Big Bang, beyond the Big Bang, because we maintain that nothing can come from nothing, and they really can't go past that either, and that's where their argument actually falls apart.
They're stuck. Some of them try to get around it by saying things like, well, the physical laws were different back then and spontaneous generation was possible. But that in itself is not a scientific statement because there's no evidence whatsoever to indicate that.
Right.
You know, if you're going to say at some point in time spontaneous generation was possible, then the next logical question is, okay, what's your evidence for that? And they have none. So therefore, it's only imagination and speculation to say that. It's not science.
Right, and if you want to further that, by definition of science, science is all that can be observed and tested and reproducibly tested. In other words,
Right.
the results should be the same.
Right.
And by inference, there should be order. You know, whether it's the molecular structure of hydrogen, two hydrogens and one oxygen, which makes up a water molecule, we know that it's a predictable item. You're going to have two hydrogens, one oxygen, therefore you have water. The periodic table is replete with elements that have a certain order to them. A certain number of protons, certain number of electrons and neutrons make it a certain chemical element. We know that. So science is very reproducible and very much ordered. Okay? We know that the universe is very much ordered. Okay? It's not a random, chaotic process. And hence, by inference, you can't have totally disordered, random, chaotic events in the universe and then think that something ordered will come out of it. It just doesn't work. Okay, but with entropy, you know, you go from order down to disorder, but we still see order in the universe. You know, whether you're going to launch a rocket ship from Cape Canaveral up to the moon, you know, by using the laws of physics, by using the laws of trajectory, movement, motion, gravity, and so forth, you can predict where you're going to launch your rocket, at what target, so that as the moon moves into that position, you're going to put a moon, an object around the moon in the form of a rocket or a satellite or whatever, because it's very predictable and very ordered. So order had to come from something. Okay.
I would add to that, too, that at first glance, a lot of events in the universe appear to be random. But if you really look closely at it, that really doesn't hold up. Like, for instance, someone gets in an auto accident this afternoon and they're seriously hurt and their car is banged up. You would say, well, that was a random thing. You know, he didn't know that truck was going to run the red light at that certain time when he was going through the intersection and blah, 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 and it was just a random event that happened. But if you look at it closely, you know, the guy got in the truck at a certain time, was headed in a certain direction at a certain time. You were headed toward the light at a certain time. Something caused the man to not see the red light, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there really are reasons to explain why the accident happened if you get down to it. It didn't just happen. There were a number of events that led up to it happening. And that's really true with just about everything that happens to us. Even though on the surface it may look random, if you look deeper, you'll find out there's all kinds of reasons why it happened the way it happened. So it's really not a random thing after all.
It's a great example because within space and time, that accident occurred because certain things were put in motion.
Right.
And within a time context, everything came to that point in time where it happened.
And the physical laws of the universe were all operating the way they always do. You know, two solid objects can't occupy the same space at the same time, and speed and, you know, all the other scientific mumbo-jumbo you can use to explain it. But the point is, there really is no such thing as a totally random event.
Correct. And consequently, we will argue that the universe didn't occur because of a random collection of gases and masses and atoms and elements,
Right.
But they were all brought together at the right time, at the right temperature, at the right location, and it
By
happened.
a superior intelligence.
That is correct. And science is replete with evidences of superior intelligence and design. The design argument, we can go on, whether it's in outer space or down to the microbiological level, using water as an example, or even DNA, which I believe is the most incredible evidence of design and intelligence. I believe that DNA is the thumbprint of God. I've said that many times during this show, and I believe that eventually any serious seeker in a scientific community that examines DNA for what it is and how complex it is has to come to the conclusion that this was designed, this did not happen by random chance, random events, or random propagation. In a primordial soup, if you want to take it all the way back to the beginning, just could not have happened. It's absolutely impossible. And the other thing that scientists have a problem with is sexual reproduction, if we're going to talk about DNA. How did the male or female of each species simultaneously exist and evolve to the point where they could copulate and have another created being
Right.
happen as a result of random
How
events?
did the two sexes evolve at the same time in order to make the whole system
Exactly.
work?
Exactly.
It doesn't make sense. If evolution were true, it would seem to me that all reproduction would be asexual, which there are some simple creatures that reproduce themselves. It's called asexual. It's not there aren't two sexes that come together. They are literally able to reproduce themselves. Why are we all not that way? That would be the logical way for evolution to do it.
Right. And it would be random as well. Very, very difficult argument for science to come back at us with. So anyway, we've already established that there is design both at the microbiological level and also using the universe as an example. Order exists. It's very clear that order exists. There's an ordered number of objects. The orbits of all of our planets in our solar system are predictable. Halley's Comet is predictable. I think it's one every 106 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's predictable. Science knows when the next Halley's Comet is going to come around the Earth or near the Earth and around the Sun and then shoot back out into its trajectory.
I find it amazing that the Earth and the Sun and the planets move in such an orderly fashion that we measure time by them. And there's no clock made by a human being in the world that is as accurate as the heavenly bodies are in measuring time. Even the atomic clock in Washington, which is supposed to be accurate to I don't know what it is, 10 billionth of a second or something, even that isn't as accurate as the Earth itself in its revolution. That to me is staggering.
Yeah, it is. When you look at it, and it doesn't matter if it's microbiology or basic chemistry, getting it down to the chemical elements, how many nuclei or how many atoms and protons and electrons are rotating around an atom at any given time. There's an ordered structure to each level of electrons. And
it always functions exactly the same way at the same speed.
And it's predictable.
Yes, entirely predictable.
Science can predict that.
That's what science is based on, that the material universe is predictable.
And the problem that science has is that they have a hard time explaining this order without the existence of God.
Mm-hmm.
Without
some superior intelligence somewhere.
And we maintain that God had everything to do with this orderly nature of every created thing. Everything that we can see and taste and touch and smell and measure owes its existence to God.
Sounds logical to me.
And science, I feel that science every day proves the existence of God.
Mm-hmm.
And again, DNA, I believe, is the thumbprint of God. All life depends on its reproduction. It doesn't matter if it's an asexual thing or if it's sexual reproduction or whatever, but DNA is the bottom line. Even
That's the blueprint that makes everything work.
Correct.
Who designed the blueprint?
You know, when Watson and Crick discovered the double helical configuration of DNA in 1954, and they shared a Nobel Prize for it, they had no idea as to how complex all of the chemistry was that went into the unzipping of each strand of DNA, and then the reconfiguration and the transcription, and
they're still trying to figure it all out.
It's phenomenal, the amazing complexity at the intracellular level. Well, folks, we've come to the conclusion of our hour. I want to thank you for staying tuned to us. You have been listening to Evidence for Faith, and we hope and pray that you'll join us again next week for a continuation of this discussion on the existence of God. And remember, the best reason for being a Christian is because it's true.